Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. My name is Sharon, and I will be moderating today. In pre-pandemic times, this weekly program was hosted by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, ICSS, at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland, California. During the pandemic, we have been meeting on Zoom, and we intend to continue to meet on Zoom in hybrid meetings when we go back to the library, which we have done occasionally, but we're not ready to do that all the time. I am a member of the planning committee that organizes these sessions. Also, we maintain the website, icsmarx.org, and we post on our YouTube channel, ICSS Marxist, and we also keep our financial records. For over a decade now, actually it's over 15 years, Sunday morning at the Marxist Library has been a platform for diverse presentations and discussions on political economy, the fight against racism and imperialism, socialism, the environment. In short, much needed alternatives to the voices of the corporate capitalist media that surround us. We always welcome your feedback and suggestions. Our motto is what Marx said: the philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. As a group, ICSS does not represent the views of any one organization, although we as individuals may express agreement with any number of different groups. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. And I have to go back to what I was reading. Lifelong social justice activist Steve Martinot has worked as a machinist and organized a number of shops. Steve organized a trucking company in New York City, which led to a wildcat strike. He has been engaged in Latin American solidarity and once faced indictment from the federal government for that. In addition, Steve has done neighborhood organizing and edited 2 underground newspapers, one in New York and one in the Akron area. A former political prisoner, Steve was incarcerated in 1970. After Steve started writing in the 1980s, he taught at Colorado University and UCSF. He has produced 8 books, 4 on racialization and prison abolition, and 3 as volumes with from different conferences. He also translated a book on racism by Albert Memmi from the French. And he has numerous articles. Some of them are listed in the announcement for this program, and we hope that you will have a chance to read. He has an article in the latest issue of Counterpunch. So we're very happy to have Steve here today, and please take it away, Steve, and I will lead the discussion, or moderate rather the discussion after you complete your presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Yeah.
I think we can, yes.
Great. Okay, there are a number of places that I could start this talk. One would be the killings of the last couple of weeks, the first few weeks of the new year. Another one would be with the introduction of military equipment to the police and my analysis of that, what I think it means. And third, with the innate militarization of the police from way back. And so I think I'll start with a little bit of history which I saw occurring in New York City, where I was living in 1960s, with the development of police violence, both against the radical movements and the peace movement, and against people of color, principally the Black community in New York. It was at that time that the New York Police Department developed the first SWAT team, which was called shit. I'm blanking on it now. But it was a first pilot project SWAT team, and they were picking people up for or recruiting people for high desire for violence. This was admitted by a captain of the tactical police force. That's what it was called, of the tactical police force at that time. And it gradually spread to the rest of the country, so that there was, and I would say, a number of incidents of Black people being killed or beaten in New York and elsewhere, but New York in particular. I remember there was a Black BAI reporter who was covering the funeral ceremony for a Black guy who had been killed by the cops. And he was picked off by the police at the very moment that the march got to the church where the funeral ceremony was going to be, and they beat him up on the street. And he is talking into the mic about what is going on with him right there on the radio station. So it was being broadcast to the entire radio audience of WBAI that this was happening to him. These are sort of milestones in the development of police brutality that we should, like, keep in mind. Of course, another one was then the killing of Oscar Grant in at the BART station, and there, this guy did a video of the killing by amassing some of the phone videos of people on the train while Oscar Grant was being killed, and puts together this video. And it's very obvious exactly what was happening there. They didn't have anything on him. They picked on him because he was Black and he was sitting against the side of the station. They rip him up off the street, off where he's sitting, and throw him face down on the platform. And then they sit on him, and then they can't get his hands out from underneath him because he was their weight prevented it. So they're struggling with him, and this guy, Mezzoli, stands up, reaches for his gun, and shoots him. He says he reached for his taser. That's crap, because the weight difference between the gun and the taser is enormous. So, and they wear them on opposite sides of their body. That was the beginning of a real resistance to the police in Oakland and Berkeley. This was New Year's Eve of 2009, and it's been building ever since. I remember looking at the statistics for the number of police who were the number of people who the police had shot and killed in 2015, and it was 1,100. Today, they come up with a statistic that says that that record has been broken by the police nationwide for 2022 was 1,176. And still, or rather, maybe defensively, the DOD is giving the police military weaponry and military equipment, loaded vehicles, armored vehicles, drones, assault weapons, gas, various gases, etc. And so that's that's what we face today in with the police nationwide. Now, I got involved in this present series of articles that I just finished. The one that was published in Counterpunch this week was the fourth in a series of 4 on the militarization of the police, because it's become an issue through the state having passed a law that says to the cities, you have to be careful which weaponry you allow into your local police departments, and give some guidelines as to how the cities should deal with this in terms of getting public input and responses to the introduction of new weaponry. I find it interesting that Berkeley, which is, like usually in the forefront, is behind the times. They passed their own version of this law 3-4 months ago, and it doesn't contain all of the popular measures that the state does. The state calls for forums and neighborhood discussions and things like that, and the Berkeley version doesn't. And I find this very interesting. But what the police are saying they need these weapons for is primarily that there are weapons out there in the streets, in people's hands, military grade weaponry that they have to be able to counteract and defend themselves against. And so in the first first of my series, of this latest series, I go over a little bit of the history of that, the first military grade weapons, assault weapons, that got into people's hands was back in the 60s. It was back in the 60s when the National Guard was taking the lead in organizing for defense of the government against massive demonstrations, calling for freedom of the Black people and brown people. And this was just as the civil rights movement was reaching a peak in 63, 64, 65. And I remember Fred Cook was writing some articles on these training sessions that the National Guard was holding with neo-Nazi and right-wing organizations throughout the United States, say survivalist organizations, etc. And when the word got out through his and other articles that this was going on, the program was canceled, but the weapons had been given out to people's hands, and they were out there. They were illegal at that time, and the government had nothing to do with it. They had nothing to do about it. They couldn't just go out and say, "Okay, we're going to take these weapons back," because that would have caused a stir. So they let it go, and when people had these weapons and they needed money, they would take them and trade them in for or pawn them in a gun store. So they got into the gun stores, and then they got stowed back out into the streets, and that was the beginning of the presence of these assault weapons in the streets of the United States. The United States government then decided, okay, let's see if we can use this. And that's when the Iran-Contra thing was going, and Gary Webb did a number of articles on how the government was bringing weapons into LA to start a turf war between the Crips and the Bloods, each of which was, they're trying to develop a certain market share in the drug trafficking. And that kind of thing put, well, the way Gary Webb told the story, there were 2 boxcars full of weapons that were backed into a siding somewhere in LA and left unlocked. And then the word was given out, and the next day they were all gone. So the people had come in and had taken these weapons. So the government is implicitly involved in the presence of these weapons in the hands of people in the streets, and especially to try to develop wars between, drug gangs or whatever. And the purpose for that is to enable greater denigration and deprivation of the groups, and especially the people of the communities of color. And that is also why the cops have been hitting on Black people and brown people in their own use of weapons to kill over the last few years. The first statistic that was brought out by the Malcolm X grassroots movements for 2012. That is, there was one Black person being shot by the cops every 28 hours. It was against that I noticed the statistic of 1,100 for the year for 2015, and that would come out to around 3 a day. And from that moment on, it has been at least 1,000. At least 1,000 people killed by the police every year. And now then they're saying, well, it's 1,176 for 2022. Okay. What is the basis on which the police are using their own innate militarization to do this? I did as part of the study of the book that we were reading at Okolele. I had a study of the tactics of the police. They would stop somebody on the street, give them a command that would be humiliating. The guy, his own self-respect and sense of dignity, would refuse it. And for this, the police would try to handcuff him or beat him or do all kinds of things. And if he attempted to escape, they would shoot him. There was case after case after case of this kind of thing. So what that meant to me was that there was a tactic that was already militarized that the cops were using to be able to not only harass, but kill or injure or lock up people of color. And that was what I call the command and obedience paradigm. It is the fundamental element of a military and militarized organization. What the police were doing was imposing a form of militarization on each encounter with another individual, and using that to push him into resistance and therefore violence. So when the DOD came along with their offer of weaponry, military weaponry for local police departments, it said to me, they're building on something they already have fostered on the part of the police throughout the country. Now, what I have added to this is that it's not sufficient to simply say, well, the cops are using this military ethos to impose a military form of organization on civilian society. They're doing it in a particular way to pick up on what I call the structures of racialization in the United States. And this will relate to, like things that are happening right now, and which we are seeing not only with the Tyree Nichols killing, but the riots, the uprisings in Atlanta against the formation of what they call Cop City, and which is a kind of an allied incident to People's Park here in Berkeley. But also the fact that the police, by killing, by using their weapons, by beating, by just handcuffing and so like restricting people's liberty that way, have created a role model for the what they call the general social violence that is now being which they claim to be interested in undoing. Or correcting for. And that structure of racialization needs to be, I think, clearly understood. When we look at the way people are raced in the United States, we see it's different from the way they are raced in Mexico or in Belize or in Brazil, elsewhere. There is a top echelon of the hierarchy of races, and it's white, and it's derived from European colonialism. And we have to understand that race itself is an offshoot of European colonialism. But in each country, in each culture, you have a structure which distinguishes between those who are doing it and those to whom it is done. The way I like to put it is, for instance, that Black people are not, in the United States, are not born Black. They're made Black by white supremacist society. And white people in the United States are not born white. They are made white by white supremacist society. One side of this division is those who are the ones who are racializing others, and the others are the ones who are racialized. In other words, that race is a verb. It's not a noun. The verb is to racialize. And you have white people who racialize others as fulfilling the subject role of the verb, with others entered as objects in grammatical metaphor. So what the police have done is accept their role as racializers on the level of political project. And you see the other side, and in particular, for instance, with white liberals who, like try to advance the cause of the oppressed and of people of color, still are unable to, or find it very difficult not to objectify those they're working with, and find it very difficult to grant them their autonomy and their sovereignty as people. Why? Because that's their role as white in the structure of racialization. It's one of the hardest things for people to understand, white people to understand, is how they continually objectify those who are racialized by white supremacy. And here it is now that the police have picked this up along with the media, And, like even in, I used to watch, Channel 5, PIX News, and they would every now and then pick up on a crime that had been committed, and they would show the picture of the suspect, and it was 90% of the time it was a person of color. The police, when they attack, confront, approach someone of color, they know that he is now going to be apprehensive of them. And it won't take much to get him running away from them, which will then lead to more violence. That's what happened to Nichols in Memphis. The story I heard was that he was in an accident, and he actually waved the cops over to, they come over and give them all some assistance. That wasn't the story of the next day. I generally tend to go along with the original story because the cop changes, the cops change it, the media change it for their own reasons. But the cops then attacked him. They were going to handcuff him right away. He broke loose, ran away. They chased him and they beat him up. And he died. So anyway, the police are only a half of the extent to which the project of racialization has been picked up politically in the United States, the other half being the prison system. And let me just say a word about that. The prison system in the United States is the largest in the world, both in numbers and per capita. And it's composed mostly of people of color who have been arrested for violating the command and obedience paradigm in one form or another. Many are just there for, disobedience. But it gets escalated and it gets increased. And it also is used, what's it called? Plea bargaining. Yeah. Plea bargaining is a mechanism whereby a guy is charged with a serious felony, which will put him away for, 10 or 20 years, even though there's no evidence for it. And then the prosecutor comes and makes a deal with him. If he will write a confession to a lesser charge, they'll give him a life sentence. And so you have an enormous number of people in the prison system right now who are there for having admitted to something that they didn't do in order to not be tried on a more serious charge, knowing that the cops would come along with evidence against them in the serious charge if he ever went to trial. I once was in a panel with an actual judge, the Supreme Court, a Superior Court judge from Alameda County, and I mentioned to her that if I said that every person that was in prison on a plea bargain was innocent, there would be no way in which the state could, or the county could contradict me, because the only thing they have, having dispensed with the case, is the guy's admission. They don't have any evidence. They don't have any witnesses. There was no hearing. There was no a trial. There was no, like any other evidence. So they would have to say, okay, if all we got is this admission, and we're throwing the admissions out, the guy has to be innocent. And I said there was nothing that could be used against my argument, and she had to agree with that. She had to agree that just on the basis of the process of plea bargaining, there is no evidence against any of these people who are in prison now on plea bargains. Well, that means that the entire prosecutorial dimension of the Justice Department and the prison system that accepts it, and warehouses all these people, as Davis used to say, Angela Davis, are all part and parcel of the structure of racialization. And so now we're faced with they're even using this structure of racialization to cloud the distinction now between people of color and class. I got into an argument with somebody just this morning about the Tyree Nichols killing, and he's saying no, there's no racism involved there. There were black cops, and the victim is black. And I said no. First of all, the 5 who beat him up were cops, and therefore they were part and parcel of what the police department had accepted for itself in its role as racializers. And what that distinction across that the verb to racialize becomes is a distinction between the racializers and the racialized. And what the police have done is make that distinction or confuse that distinction with the issue of the classical issue of race, in which race is inherent in a person. They're born with it, and they get it from their parents, and so forth and so on. But I think that the structure of racialization that I have described gives a much clearer picture of what race is all about in the United States, and makes it clearer what is going on now with the police with respect to um, their own killing and their role in it. And so the last question that I would address here is why now? Why would the police, in the wake of 2020 and the massive demonstrations against police injustice and police killing that took over whole cities, why the police are doing this now? And of course, for me, one reason was that in 2020, what these demonstrations had as a fundamental demand was defunding the police. And right away, I suspected that what their response would be an increase in criminality. People would be getting shot on the street, and the police would have no sense of who had done it or why. And I have my suspicions about a couple of killings here in Berkeley at the end of 2020 and during the spring of 2021. As a way of the police saying to the political structure, no, you need us because we're facing a new crime wave. And so you can't take money away from us, and you can't reduce our ranks. We are essential to the stability of the city. And that, of course, ties back into why they want military equipment to counteract the military grade weaponry that is now in people's hands on the street. And some of it gets used. I mean, you get these stories once in a while about somebody being shot because there's the use of guns out on the street. But it's not intentional. But also, I think that there's a reason. There's a further reason why the cops are asking for military equipment. We don't see them asking for it, but I have no doubt that they are asking for it because they already have a militarist approach to the people that there's a link into COVID. And there's a large resistance growing to COVID. to the vaccines, to the lockdowns, to the maskings. And there is new research that has revealed connections of the pandemic to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense has been playing a very, very interesting role in this, insofar as they have contracted with Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson to produce what they call countermeasures. And it's in their contracts. These are called countermeasures, prototype countermeasures, and not vaccines. And this was brought out by a suit by a woman named Brooke Jackson against Pfizer for having defrauded the United States government because they had no tests as to the effectivity and the safety of their vaccine. And Pfizer got off in court by presenting contracts they had with the DOD that said that not only are these not vaccines, but there's no necessity to test them for safety and effectivity. Because they're bioweapons and they are contracted by the DOD. And as stuff like this starts to get out, there's going to be a lot of reaction. There's going to be a lot of well, it's hard to say what form it's going to take. But for myself, I wonder why left-wing organizations, Marxist organizations, socialist organizations in the United States didn't take at least a stance of skepticism toward the order that was being developed around COVID, based upon, like the what do they call it? Censorship of people who are then called misinformation sources. And I think that the DOD is preparing the police for the ability to deal with these things in greater measure. Now, I see I've been talking for about 45 minutes. So I think that I will stop here and open it for questions and comments and discussion.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for reminding us about that race is a social construct. And this is going to be a very interesting discussion. But before we do that, we're going to take a short break, and I'm going to ask Jean Rule to talk about our future programs. Jean?
Okay, I think I'm visible and audible.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Steve, for very provocative and very interesting discussion. I'm sure this is going to be a wonderful discussion we have. But we will continue this process next week when on February 5th, we will have Mark Albertson back to talk about Hitler's rise to power. That he didn't take power, it was offered to him. So that'll be a good discussion. Following that, we have a discussion on Stalin's book, Marxism and the Problems of Linguistics. And our comrade Yusuf will be speaking on that topic. And then we have additional things on we're looking into, but we're not sure about yet. So you can see all this on our regular weekly announcements. They're sent out, and you can sign up for those on our website at icssmarks.org. And back to you, Sharon.
Thank you. Richard, do you have anything to say about finances?
Well, I would refer people to the website also. We are collecting money for our expenses, which are not great, but we do have them. So please go to the website and see how there's a button there, a donate button. There's a number of different ways you can contribute.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to open the discussion, and please, if you can, please use the reaction button at the bottom of the Zoom screen to raise your hand, and I will try to keep the stack. Thank you. I see 3 people already. So let's go. And Steve, you have the option if you want to answer each question, or if you want to wait and bundle the questions, whatever you want to do is fine. Richard Wright, followed by Roger, followed by Kim, followed by Jean. Go ahead, Richard. Yeah,
thank you, Steve, for your presentation. I see Norma's not here, so I think I'm going to have to fill in for Norma. I had a problem with your analysis, in that it fundamentally goes down to racial analysis, and the police involves the police. My problem is that does not explain, for example, the police in mine workers, where they brought in police. I think actually may have been the initial use of the police. It doesn't explain the use of police for the Irish or the Germans when they were coming into this country. It doesn't explain the police for Native Americans, which we've seen. Nor does it explain the use of the police in going across the borders. And I find it interesting that you sort of shied away from the use of police as an expression of a greater reality, if you will, and that is the United States has always been a country that lives in war, and that it seems to me that this police state or police actions really come out of our foreign military quote adventures. So if you'd like to comment on that, or whether I'll shut up.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right, just briefly, I would tie the transformation of policing from class issues, such as dealing with the immigrants in the turn of the century and against the unions in the 30s and so forth, to dealing with racialization, to the fact that the United States had become the primary superpower, and at the end of the World War II, and was becoming, or had become, the primary colonial power, while at the same time allegedly advancing the sovereignty and independence of the former colonial states, and had found itself limited in its ability to pursue its Cold War because of the uprisings of Black people in the United States against Jim Crow and the incredible evil of that. I mean, I'm just now reading Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, and I've never read anything quite as directed and broad and portrait painting of what it meant to be Black in the South under Jim Crow. I'm halfway through the book, so I don't know. I haven't gotten into what the people that she's following, you know, like faced in the North. But the fact that the United States became the chief colonial power in the world, and against the Soviet Union and then against China, meant that its own relations to the third world had to take not only primacy, but we're double dealing in terms of you know, like having to win the third world over while at the same time suppressing them. And so that, I think, became one of the international sources of the shift of the police to their own role in the structures of racialization. I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks. Next is Roger.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome back to the library. For those of you who are somewhat new to the library, when we met in person, Steve was a fairly regular participant at the library, and it's good to see you again virtually. And I particularly liked your formulation of where you explained that we're not born white, we're born Black. We become that because of the societal structures. I thought that was a very helpful way of understanding your theory of racialization. My question has to do with police brutality and whether it's increasing or not. And I'd like you to address it, but on a methodological side, how do you measure that? How do you determine that? Because if we just say that the police are simply becoming more brutal, do we know that, is that a factor of that's simply the police that are becoming more brutal, or is there a greater awareness of police brutality and a greater reporting of it? And why that is important is because there is a fight back movement against police brutality. And if we simply say that it's just increasing willy-nilly, it discounts the fight back movement and possible successes that movement has had. So if you could, Steve, address that, please.
Yeah, sure. No, I think you're absolutely right. And part of it is because there is a fight back movement, which began right after Brown v. Board in 1956 and or 54, whenever it was, that that was what led to the development of the tactical police force in New York, and led to the violence of the New York Police Department during the 70s and the 80s, and has led to the role that the police have played, providing a role model for social violence as such. And I think that the police are interested in increasing the amount of violence in the society in order to, shall we say, militarize even more their presence in their presence to the society as a whole. And I think that you know, like the movements of the 2020, which were calling for defunding the police, were not really a threat to the police. They were a threat to the ability of the police to maintain the kind of social order that they want, and so they have increased their violence in order to make those movements more violent, so that they then get the kind of order that they're thinking. I don't think it's a cause and effect relationship. I think there's a real dialectic there between the movements for justice and the police movement for autocracy, white supremacist autocracy.
Okay, next is Kim.
Hi, thanks, Steve, for your talk. Since this is the Neville Proctor Marxist Library, I wanted to remind everybody about the first paragraph of the manifesto. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals, and then he says German police spies. So I just wanted to remind people about the police in an earlier age. So I was looking at the last two articles that you had published in Counterpunch, and I noticed towards the end of the most recent one, you had a section called The Alternative.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the US Constitution and democracy. And so I was hoping that you could say a little bit about that, because in the article previous to that, you had mentioned neighborhood associations try to bring people together, but if it's only to lobby the council members who say, we're already doing everything we can, what good is it? So I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about your ideas for alternatives to this horrible situation.
Well, that's a problem for me, because what I see the left doing, or the left and center left and so forth doing, is undergoing a process of acquiescence to what the political structures are demanding, and not trying to be more than a lobbying force with respect to the political structures. And so that pains me, because I know that, you know, like there's a real potential for a force that can get out in the streets and do things. Still, even now, during the pandemic, and we see that around People's Park. I mean, here in Berkeley, there have been adamant objections to what they're doing. They cut down all the trees and like things like that, but people are back there and they're camping out and they're linking themselves together to resist. But by and large, the left is not doing this. And so what I'm trying to do with the proposal that I make is develop something which is sort of a compromise there. That is, look at this one aspect of the Constitution, due process of law, and bring that down to the street level people, and give potentially. I mean, I don't really have any real hope that this is something that like could be demanded or even brought into reality even at the city level. But it would at least provide a guidance to neighborhood associations and neighborhood organizations and things like that to adopt, to seize, to develop a greater political role of an autonomous and sovereign nature, rather than make them or allow themselves to be what do you call it, the handmaidens or whatever of the political structure. Once the political structure knows that they have the people who would object in the palm of their hand, they know that they don't have anything to worry about. And that's basically the motivation for putting it out in the way I did. But I don't have any hope that, like even that would, like gain any kind of favor in any level of political structure in the United States, even though it's from the Constitution, or maybe especially.
Well, just to follow up on that, I was thinking here in Vallejo, a number of years ago, there was a new organization created, the Police Oversight Committee. Yeah. So I know a number of cities have such a committee, but doesn't seem to be very effective.
No, that's what happened to the group in Portland. It had existed. There was an oversight movement from 2015 on, and it was given the role of being an official oversight group over the police in 2019, and after the demonstrations of 2020, it was either co-opted or it couldn't see a way of pushing against the forces that were opposed to it, and it became just an intervener, kind of intermediary between the police and isolated individuals who were facing their own emotional problems. Yeah.
Okay, Jean.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Steve. This is a very difficult and complex issue. But I wanted to offer a somewhat different perspective but also had two specific questions I'd like you to comment on. First of all, I was deeply involved with the case of P.D. Perez up in Richmond, which was a white guy shot and killed by a white policeman, Wallace Jensen. And it kind of followed this pattern. There was just, immediate cover up. They blamed PD, saying that he started the fight and so forth, and covered the whole thing up. And I worked on that for about a lot of time over the last couple of years. And we finally did get a judgment. They appointed an independent commission that found in favor, saying no, PD did not do any of the things he was accused of. And Wallace Jensen was in error. But they produced this result and immediately filed it. And it's now someplace where I don't think anybody can find it in the document section or wherever. So I know this, and that's one case that took so much energy. And then I think of the total scope of the problem, which is so immense. So I just wanted to note that. And part of this was some of the points that the P.D. Perez people came up with was that more white people than black people are killed numerically than black people in the United States, and more whites than blacks are in prison numerically, although they're proportionally less. So I just wanted to throw that out, and you can comment on that, as I'm sure you will. But also I wanted to ask two specific questions. One is, looking over your article, I noticed you have a constitutional way of ending police violence. But the other thing, I just wondered about, how about just banning assault weapons, the way that nice woman in New Zealand did, just getting rid of assault weapons entirely. And then the other thing is Asian American. I don't know whether you covered that very much, but it's very important recently. And I have two grandkids that are Asian American, so I'm personally very interested in this. So I look forward to your comments. Thank you.
All right. I don't have any hope at all that as long as the white supremacist culture has any kind of dominance in the United States, that there will be any kind of outlawing of weapons. The Second Amendment is an amendment that is and can be used endlessly for white people to defend themselves and protect themselves against the colonized. The colonized being Black, brown, Asian, Native American, and mostly women. So I end the article with something that I think is unthought and is possibly therefore innovative, about one way to use a particular truc, a trick, a thing out of the Constitution to deal with the problem of police violence on the part of people on the street. And on the part of Asians, I haven't written much. I have been watching carefully as an anti-Asian feeling has developed as a result of Trump's claiming that the COVID was a Chinese disease, and so forth and so on. And wondering what kind of structures are going to emerge around that, other than what is being used today for structural racialization in general. So I'm watching. I did notice and raised it with a couple of friends that this shooting in Half Moon Bay was mostly Asian, and the guy who did it was Asian. And same in Monterey Park. And I asked this friend of mine what he thought of what was going on in Half Moon Bay. And he said, well, it looks like a dispute over job categories, job whatever. And so I have to, you know, like I put that in my database and keep watching. But I haven't come up with anything that I want to, you know, like put forth as a specific structure with respect to Asians. Did you mention P.D. Perez? And he may have appeared white, but his name was Perez. And he was known to the cop who shot him. And what that means, I don't know. I don't know what their prior interactions were. But the cop who shot him followed him as he was walking down the street, carrying a plastic toy rifle. And the cop then said, well, he thought he was had a real rifle, which anybody could tell was not the case. All they had to do was look at the way he was walking and how he's carrying it. So for me, this cop had something out for P.D. Perez, and he let him have it. I don't know what the outcome of it was. I don't know what your involvement was, but that's the way I read the incident, as it was recounted to the media and to I guess the radio station by people who knew and had seen what had happened.
Okay, next is Janet, followed by Laura and Karen. Go ahead, Janet.
Yes, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hi, Steve. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So I have a number of things to ask you about. Well, first, the Second Amendment supposedly allows Blacks and other people of color to defend themselves as well, right? But anyway, okay. So first, would you comment on what has been happening in Oakland with the new Mayor Sheng Tao, the most recent decision to put the police commissioner on administrative leave.
Police chief.
Police chief, thank you. and also the effectiveness of Oakland's macro program. That's one. I'm curious about.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It might be too big a topic, but I'm curious about the history of the police and the history and the role of police in other parts of the world, other countries, how similar or not that is to the US. I also wonder about, or I think about Nazism as racism, and how also how the Ukrainian neo-Nazis are racializing, in a sense, the Russians in Eastern Ukraine, and using Russophobia and attacking the Russians in the Donbass. This is the Ukrainian armed forces, not the police, attacking the people, their own people now they're part of Russia, but anyway, so that, and then finally, I'm thinking about like the line between racism and obedience and genocide. So, I mean, the Ukrainians consider Russians, or the right-wing Ukrainians consider the Russians orcs, ORC, subhumans. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, those are all big questions. I'm not sure I remember them all.
I'll remind you.
By the way, macro stands for Mobile Assistance Community Response of Oakland.
Oh yeah. So I haven't been keeping up with the details of what's been going on in Oakland. But I was at a housewarming for APTP 2 weeks ago.
Anti-Police Terror Project.
Yes. And was very impressed. I'm always impressed by them. I'm always impressed by Kat Brooks. And she had the new mayor there to come and give a brief talk. And so that was my first introduction to the new mayor, whose name I don't have right at the tip of my tongue right now.
Sheng Tao.
Sheng
Tao.
Okay, good, thank you. And I was impressed. But with respect to the Oakland police, I will have to see more of what's going on and get a sense of how the APTP group is reacting, and what their role is in it, as well as some other people. And then I would be able to come up with maybe something to say. With respect to Nazism in the neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, I think you're absolutely right. That they are, like in the process of racializing the Russians. And it's something that the United States has done. The United States has racialized the Russians. The United States definitely racialized the Serbians in 1999 when they were bombing Serbia and claiming, the autonomy of Kosovo in South Serbia. And that's what fascism does. It uses the structures of racialization in that way. And other than that, I mean, I think that you're asking questions that are very, very big, and would take a long time to discuss them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Laura.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I appreciated especially was the pointing out that plea bargaining makes it impossible to actually know whether somebody's guilty or innocent. And there's such a huge number of the cases go to plea bargaining.
Yeah.
And I had a question similar to what Janet was asking about what other places in the world might do, and thinking about one of my favorite Michael Moore documentaries was Where to Invade Next, where he talked about bringing good ideas back to the United States from other countries. And a couple of them were Norway, where even after a mass killing in 2011 of 70 some people, they still kept their maximum sentence of 21 years, although they can extend it if they don't feel that the person has got, is able to return to society. That was Norway. And then Portugal had made drugs crime-free, had decriminalized all drugs. And at the end of the thing where Michael Moore asked, at the end of that little segment where Michael Moore asks, what would you advise the US? And they said, get rid of the death penalty. That we're the major I don't know how many other countries even have the death penalty, not as many, and they don't kill as many as we do. But so the question that similar to what Janet was asking is, other places or places within there's probably nothing that's really good, but some better places in the US or around the world as to, excuse me, how they deal with police.
Well, I would have to begin any kind of discussion like that by pointing out that the United States is essentially an exception. That is, it had a form of slavery that transcended other forms in other countries, except maybe Brazil. And it maintained the degradation and the deprivation of Black people long after slavery had been ended. And so the culture of the United States and the way in which the people or the police relate to the people and to people of color, and particularly Black people, is specific to the United States as a form of, or as the core of a form of fascism in the United States that, for me, goes all the way back to 1607 and the founding of the Jamestown colony. You have police being more brutal, more murderous at different times in other countries. For instance, when the colonels were in charge of Argentina, or the police in Brazil, who, you know, like, have been known to shoot dozens and dozens of homeless people in the middle of the Brazilian cities at one time or another. But I think that, you know, like, there's a specificity of the way in which the police address the people and people of color in the United States, which is specific. And it's been, as I probably indicated in terms of the last couple of questions, that is what has consumed me, or you know, like, been the focus of my attention with respect to police. That is the specificity of the United States as a culture, and the way in which that has unfolded in the last 20 years with respect to the maintaining of the colonized mind, that is the white mind, and the colonialist, the colonialist mind is the white mind, and the colonized people subject to this, that is people of color. One of the people who I have usually looked to as a way of trying to understand different aspects of the racial situation in the United States and the policing situation in the United States is Albert Memmi, who he wrote a book, an early book called "The Colonizer and the Colonized," and then he also wrote a book called "Racism," which is what I translated into English. And he develops a very, very clear and coherent structure of how that the colonizer's mind dovetails with policing. So if I was going to look at the way in which policing was related to other countries, I would want to start with, say, for instance, Europe. And you know, like, I remember when I was in France in 1959 and 60, sort of as an expatriate, there were all kinds of incidents where the cops would find Algerians in the streets of Paris and shoot them down right there on the street. And that told me a lot about, you know, like, what the colonialist police were capable of. But as I say, I've been mostly focused on how that works itself out in the United States.
Okay, I'm going to call on myself, followed by Raj and Anne. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Oakland. I'm part of the left in Oakland, and we've been working on against police violence, and we've done a few things and we've won a few things, but you never stop because when you win something, they try to take it away from you or they water it down, and there's no end to this. But, you said, Steve, that you don't have much hope that gun violence and the proliferation of guns in this country is going to end anytime soon. And of course, I don't either. I don't have hope that as long as we have capitalism, that things are going to change a whole lot. But still, the question of, well, what do we do in the meantime, or on the road to building an anti-capitalist movement? What do we do in terms of working for reform? And I think hope and despair, or hope and discouragement, are dialectic. And we need to keep hope alive by actually working in the present for as much as we can. So in Oakland, we managed to change the city charter to establish a police commission. And the vote to do that was 85% of the Oakland voters supported that, and it exists now. It's been established. Now the whole struggle is to give it more power. And what we want to do now is to take away the internal affairs investigation inside the police department of policing their own, and give that power to the police commission, which I think would be a big step forward. And it's going to be a struggle, but that's where we're going with that. And macro, that was mentioned, is a way to take away from the police the interventions when people are having a mental health crisis or other things that people dial 911 for that do not need cops. And that is now with the fire department, and they're not doing a great job in establishing it. It's only a couple of years old, but so there has to be much more public attention to that. But it was established, and that's a good thing. The cops say they don't want that function anyway. They don't want to be the interveners in mental health disputes, crises rather. So good. So let's just take that away from them. In general, I think that I'm really glad that you reminded us that race is a social construct. I grew up in New York, and my first years there, when I was a child, it seemed like it must be something natural, that there are Jewish neighborhoods and Italian neighborhoods and Irish neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods, and people fight against each other. That seemed like, oh well, that's just the way that's just the way it is, right? And then when I was in the 6th grade, I was 12 years old when Brown versus Board was decided. And to his everlasting credit, our 6th grade teacher had us discuss that, which I never heard of de jure segregation. I don't think I'd ever heard the word segregation. And then I went home and asked my parents, so if it was only about the South, right, and the residue, or the holdover from the Civil War, then how come there are no Negro children in our school? And that was my first against racism. But I think that racism is the major way that the ruling class keeps working people fighting among ourselves instead of uniting against the ruling class. And racism, so the struggle against racism is absolutely central to forging a revolutionary movement in the United States. And the cops are the cops. They're the occupying arm. Go ahead.
Well, no, did you finish?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that Oakland passed this police commission at more or less the same time that in Berkeley we passed the Police Accountability Board, which passed by 85% on the vote. It was for a charter amendment. And the one thing that, like those who fostered it and insisted upon was that it would be independent of the city manager's office. And once it was passed, at no time was the city manager ever going to allow it to be independent of her. Nothing has ever happened with respect to PAB without the city manager being a force in. So there's a struggle going on there. And, like I actually, in the first issue of the series of articles that I wrote, I make mention of the milquetoast process or characteristic of those who try to stand up to the city manager, but because they were in themselves imbued with this idea of lobbying and like working with elected officials, couldn't even get to first base with her. So I mean, like she took the whole thing over and has essentially, like run it well, the way she wants. And the latest scandal to come out of that was that she actually called for a consultancy to be hired to look for a new police chief, since like the old one had retired and there was an interim, this Jennifer Lewis, and so she said, okay, we'll have a search. We'll have a certain number of criteria for the search to limit itself with, and we'll get at least 3 candidates, and we'll bring them back, and we'll have them discussed by people in the city. And then she said, of the top 3, that she would pick one and present that to the city council. And of course, it never worked. She brought, they hired the consultancy. The consultancy went and did its work. It came back with 3 candidates. There were never any neighborhood discussions with them. And then the city manager came and promoted or proposed Jennifer Lewis, the interim police chief, to be hired as the new police chief. And it was just at that moment that, like all of this stuff about the emails that the downtown police were passing around, and the racist, thread there, and their disdain for Black people and for homeless people came out, and the fact that the guy who was the head of that police unit had said, we want you to arrest at least 100 people every month, which was, a lot. And
they have their quota, right?
Yeah. And so, like the movement that had been fostering the PAB all along was outraged, but they didn't really have a large public base anymore. And so we got the proposal by the city manager thrown out, and Lewis retired rather than, like face investigation. But now it's as if the whole movement of looking for a police chief has, just sort of evaporated. And so, I mean, like that. I bring that up as a way of showing, well, you can have things declared and you can have things put on paper, but that doesn't mean that anything is really going to happen of a positive nature with respect to those good ideas. And it's that next step that is the ability of a good idea to actually work its way among the people and bring people into participation, and not just like input, but real participation in the process.
Right.
That is essential.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to call on Raj and then Anne, and then if no one else who hasn't spoken, I'll call on Janet again. Raj.
Actually, I have a guest in our house today, a young scholar at UC Santa Cruz, also a musician. He wants to say something, and then I have a question for Steve, if you will allow me.
Okay.
Welcome.
Yeah,
His name is Keshav Batish.
I wanted to thank you all first. This is the first time I'm knowing of this organization through Rajji here. And it's a real treat to sit in and hear all of these very vital discussions in our communities. I wanted to ask a question on the topic of solidarity and whether it exists within the body or within the organization of the body, and then offer a comment on a book that I've begun to read, and I'm working on finishing and engaging with both its ideas and its author. There's now a retired sociology professor at UC Santa Cruz where I'm studying named John Brown Childs, and he's authored a book called Transcommunality. It's building on ideas that were presented some time ago in a conference which became known as the Iroquois Confederacy in the 1400s. And it was an organization of 5 warring tribes, and using the metaphor of a longhouse where conversations occurred horizontally instead of within a vertical orientation, much good was done and there was peace brought to those 5 nations. So this book expands on that within a modern context. And he asks the question, instead of asking what are we to do, we should be asking what has been done. So I just wanted to pose those questions and also that comment on the fact that we aren't alone in these methods of resistance, as you all know. And that's, as a musician, my work is to understand where the bridge lies between methods of resistance as freedom and finding those contexts throughout the world. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Could you clarify the first question you asked about, are you asking this group whether we're in solidarity, or are you having a broader question about solidarity?
Yeah, it's a broader question about whether solidarity exists within the body, maybe a body of an individual, or within the organization of a body.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Well, I think that, like John Brown Childs' approach is interesting, but I think that everything has changed in the last 40 years in the world, which I would characterize as the consolidation of the corporate structure. And that what has been done would need to be rethought seriously to deal with this new situation. Which I will describe very briefly as a total separation of ownership from management, and the domination of ownership by management. And therefore, we live in an economic situation in which the working class, which has its strength in production, is now marginalized along with productive corporations, as under the thumb and under the determination of the financial economy. And so what we consider to be the strength of class struggle and a working class that can organize itself around its own holding the levers of production in its own hands has to be rethought. I'll just leave it at that.
Raj, you had something.
Yeah. I think since time is short, I'll let go and let Anne and ask the question. I can talk to Steve separately later on.
Okay. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. This whole idea, I kept thinking this command obedience model is so much a part of our work life. Even in universities in Texas, it's just absolutely that model. And I think you were beginning to phrase it, but my question is a little bit different. I really like that you're addressing these things without bringing up the question of police unions as somebody's in labor. That's been the level of conversation about this core issue of police brutality. I'm much more interested in the question of police brutality as I understand it by working on a film about Anne Braden. And her notion, her going to that issue at the end of her life, and working in a very concerted fashion around that issue. And she always felt that the problem in the 60s, 70s was that there was that white people were involved in peace and Black people were involved in social justice. And there was a gulf between the understanding of the left around this issue of race. My resolution of it has just been, because I live in the South, realizing that every social relation for white people is deeply affected by the relationship to Black people, white working class people. So that if the police don't have a Black or a Latino to beat up, they're going to beat up a working class white. It's a part of the social relations of the culture, I think. But my question is, I've been looking at this Tyree Nichols stuff, and I think we're in a kind of an Emmett Till moment where the mother of Tyree Nichols has insisted that the public see the graphic images of what the police did to her son. That's a very unpleasant moment, but it's also a moment that changed things, particularly in the South. I think it's the beginning of breaking that brutalist police state in the South with the civil rights movement. And so I feel as though there's a moment here that if we don't grab hold of all of our efforts around our municipalities and everything are not going to see much development. And I'm just wondering about your comment about this specific moment where this video was released yesterday, at the absolute demand of this man's mother.
Thank you, Anne. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I hesitate to talk about the future. Because I don't think it exists. And what we can say is that the present moment exists, and what it will do and what it will mean and what it will, purvey is unknown. And I think that, who was it who said, resistance is freedom? That's Raj's friend. Resistance is freedom. And yet, we can make this a turning point, a moment. But it depends on what we do with it. So the question is this a turning point moment? It's up to us. And how we look at that, to make it a new Emmett Till, or to make it a latest atrocity after all of the atrocities, or a new form of atrocity, is up to us. For myself, I'm ready to say that what the police have done and what the police have instigated, and that for which the police are the role model, which has swept the country in the last 3 weeks with incidents of brutality and atrocity, is for us something we need to grab onto and talk about and see if we can turn it into a turning point. I'm sure there will be others who will also be trying to do that.
Thank you, Steve. Our time is almost up. Janet, I'm going to let you have the last question.
Thank you. Yeah. So regarding the police commission in Berkeley, laws can be enacted all over the place, but enforcing them is another issue. And one wonders if the, well, I don't know how it works in Berkeley, but in Oakland, the mayor oversees the police. So does the mayor run the police, or do the police run the mayor in the same, or the city, wherever it might be? But that said, I wanted to really talk about, and I forgot to bring this up before, speaking of colonialists and racists, we have the evil twins of the US and Israel. Israel is a settler colonialist entity, and American police are trained by Israelis. I believe the neck hold came out of Israel. I'm not sure, but and George Floyd, what killed George Floyd. And there has been increasing violence in the West Bank also. So can you talk a little bit about the relationship between Israel and the US when it comes to the police? Thank you.
When it comes to the what?
Police.
Police.
Training and so forth.
Yeah, I could. I mean, I don't really see what the point is, but the Israelis do go around the world training police departments. They trained the Berkeley Police Department back in the 70s. They trained the Boulder, Colorado police in the 80s. I think that it's what we really need to come to grips with is the twin colonialisms, as you say, that are twin yet joined at the hip. Well, don't get me started on Israel, because I will fly off the handle.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So that's a whole other discussion, which we've had before. Yeah. We will again. I think it's time to end the recording. Please, Raj. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.